Hello everyone, welcome back to our channel and this amazing video. I'm Aditya. In this video, we will see how to use Redux Toolkit and create a store using TypeScript in React, and we will use that store in Next13's app directory. So without any further ado, let's begin. Okay, to begin with, we have the same project that we used for our block generator. So we use Next13 OpenAI APIs to create a blog content generator where we put a prompt over here and then we generate content. So what I want to do here is I want to add an avatar image. So if you haven't seen this video, by the way, the video link will be in the description. So here I want to add an avatar URL or avatar image, you could say, and that I want to link it, or I want to bring that using Redux store or Redux states. So what I'm going to do first is, as everything in Next13 app directory is server-side rendered, I need to create some folders that will help me to understand what code is client-side, what code is server-side, because Redux Toolkit, it's client-side thing. Here we are using Redux as a global state management system, and it's totally client-side because there are hooks and there are other things involved. Now here they have a beautiful documentation again, and they have given every possible step. So what I'm going to do is I'll just explain these steps, how to create a Redux store using Redux Toolkit, and also a user slice using TypeScript. So everything will be using TypeScript. But before that, let's create inside our app folder a folder which is utils. Okay, now this convention is not mandatory that you need to follow only this convention. You can follow any file convention, doesn't matter, but as long as it makes sense to you and as long as it's structured, that's fine. So here inside utils, we will have a new folder where I will say client. Okay, all the client utils like the Redux store or any client components or any client hooks, whatever we want to add, we can add it over here. We can also add another folder if needed, like something like server utils where we have a server-side logic. Now let's go in the client folder and create another folder which is our store. Okay, this will have our store like Redux store. So there we will have our user slice, and if needed other slices. Let's say if we are creating an e-commerce store, then we will have our cart slice or some, I don't know, maybe lots, like you can create any slices you like. Slices are nothing but, you could say, our mini store in your big store. So for instance, user slice is used, in our case, will be used to store this user details. Now this slice will only contain a user state, or it will contain states related to the user and functions related to the mutation of that states. Okay, or you could say transforming that states or getting that states. So here inside store, I'll create user slice.ts. Okay, and here what we need to do is, first before we go to this step, we need to make sure that we have installed React Redux and Redux Toolkit. So I have already installed these things, so that's why I'm skipping that step. But definitely you need to install React Redux and Redux.js Toolkit. So once that's installed, next we import create slice, and payload action will come from type. So we'll just input create slice for now, Redux Toolkit. And here let's first write in a simple way, which is JavaScript way, and then we will add types in it one by one. So here I'm going to say user slice equal to create slice, and here we will have our user details or those slice details. Now what this expects is, first this slice should have a unique name. So here I'm going to say user, so this relates with the user. Next, this slice should have its initial state. So the initial state of the user will be null, because in my user slice, there will be a user state which will store details like ID, name, and avatar URL. Okay. So what we need to do is we need to create types for that user slice. So here I'm going to say const user, or let's not const actually, let's say type user equal to, then we just define the type for how our user object will look like. So there will be ID to it, which will be number. Then there will be name, which will be string, and there will be avatar, which will be string, because it's going to be a URL. Now this is our user type. Then we will have our initial state. So our initial state will have multiple states, or it could have just one state. So one of that will be, so here I'm going to say type of initial state. So this initial state, each slice has an initial state. Okay, so here we have type. So what will be in my initial state? My initial state will have a user state. So there we will have user, and it will be of type user. Now here you can add multiple state. Let's say you want to add something like account, then details related to or type of state this account is. Maybe it will have, let's say, ID, name, department, whatnot. Or you can also merge it in the user state. So it depends upon how you have it here. But for now, we just have one state here, which is user, and it's going to be object. Next, we have this initial state. Then we define our initial state here. So we will say initial state. Now this initial state is our initial state. And here we say that this initial state that we got is actually a type of this initial state. Now to get that here, what we could do is, instead of defining this in this object over here, we can simply say const user initial state, which will be of type initial state. Okay. Now by default, the user will be null because we don't have user details. Now it will throw an error because it will say cannot assign it to user. So here we can have a union operator saying that, okay, this could be user or null. So by default, our user initial state will be null, and we will simply pass that over here. Okay. So we got the initial state, we got the name. Now next thing we will need is the reducers. Okay. So reducers are nothing but set of functions that will be used to modify this state, which is user, or any initial state you have. So you can have one reducer for one initial state, which is user. You can have multiple reducers for multiple initial states or your states in this slice. So for now, we just have one reducer, which is just sets the user. So here I could say reducer, our set user function. Now this set user function will take in a function, or it's actually a function actually, this set user. So we have the key, because if you notice, this is more like a key value pair because we have object here. So key and the function. So we can pass an arrow function. Now this arrow function takes in two parameters. One is mandatory. The second one is, you can say it's more like an optional parameter. So the first parameter it takes is the state itself, which is your entire state or whatever states you have here. So using this state object, we can access our other states. The other parameter it takes is the action. Now this action is very useful when you want to pass data to this function. For instance, let's say if I want to call this function from somewhere like this, I won't be calling it like this, but just to give you an example, let's say with user details, whatever user details we have like this, then this we are passing it as a payload. Okay, so to store that payload, we use this action. So let's go over here and let's give this action some type. So this action will be of type payload action that will come from, so import type payload action from Redux JS toolkit. And now this payload action will extend our user interface, this one. Okay, because we'll be passing data in this format. So that's why we are asking this payload action to extend our user interface. Great. Now here we will say state.user is equal to action.payload. So whatever is our user state, whatever payload we pass, as we just saw before, that will be assigned to our state. Great. So this is our user slice. Perfect. Now next thing is we need to export the action, which is this set users or all the reducers you got over here. In other words, all these functions over here, not the action, sorry, action will be here. So all these functions over here. And also we need to export the user slice reducers. Okay. So what we are going to do is, here I'm going to say export const set user. So this is my first action, set user. So I will be exporting it. So here I will say user slice dot actions. So user slice dot actions will have our all these actions. Say export default user slice dot reducer. Now each user slice or each store slice, you could say, has a reducer. So we also export that reducer. And then once we export this, you will come to know why we are exporting this reducer in a moment. Once we export this reducer, this step is more like an optional step, but it's kind of like makes our life super simple. I'll tell you how. But before that, before we go to the next step, we need to add some extra things in our other file. So what I'm going to do is inside this store folder again, I will create index.ts. Okay, so this will be our global store, or you could say like the main parent store, which will bring in all our slices or substore and then just send it to the app to be used. Our app means this entire thing over here. Now here, what we need to do is we will import configure store from Redux Toolkit. Yep, that's the one, Redux.js Toolkit. And also we will import our this reducer, which is this one over here. Okay, so we will say import user reducer from user slice. So when I'm saying user reducer, I'm actually importing here this one because this is the default export. So I'm importing this one. Okay, so these two are there. So let's say have here const store equal to configure store. Now to this store, to this configure store function, we pass our all the slices as reducers again. So here I'm going to say reducer, and here I'm going to say the user. So I'm going to call my user reducer as user. So user reducer. Okay, so key and value. So the value of user, that user slice will be user reducer, and that's why we are exporting this user slice reducer so that we can use it over here. Great. So once we have this, now we need to define types for our root state and root dispatch. So dispatch will be used to call these reducer functions or these actions, while root state, or as the name suggests, state, as it has to do something with state, definitely will help us to get not just get states types or have proper typing for our steps, or help us more like on accessing whatever states our and all other slices and stores have with their typing and proper keys like this. So to make life super simple, here we will just export two types. So export type our root state. Now our root state will be a return type, and that will extend type of store.get state. Okay, so our root state, so this is our root state, it's going to be a return type, which will be type of store of get state, and then whatever states we have for each our slice, we can combine their types and just appropriately assign those types, or it will take care of that types, you could say. And then this root state will have types for our type definitions, most probably you could say in that way, like a type definition thing for all our states in all our slices. Okay, same way for dispatch, we will create one. So export type. Now you can call this anything. I'm calling this app dispatch. Now this would be of type of store.dispatch. Okay, now this we just need to make sure this and this match, because that's where these two are coming in. So once we have this, next what we need to do is whenever we want to use our these user store or any other slices, we need to use selector from Redux, and for action we need to use dispatch. Now whenever we use selector, let's say something like this, use selector, to get the most of it, we need to pass something like this root state, and every time we have to pass these things. So to make our life more simple, what we are going to do is we will create our own hook for this, and that we will store again inside this store, new file, hooks.ts. Okay, now here we will first import our root state and app dispatch, these two types. So here I'm going to say import type root state and app dispatch. Oops, sorry for that. Dispatch from the current folder, or the current file actually. So this one index.ts in the current folder, this index.ts. So that's why you're passing dot. And then once we have this, the other thing we will need is typed use selector hook, use dispatch, and use selector from React Redux. Okay, so these three will come from React Redux. Once we have these things, let's create our own hooks that will be exported from here and imported in the any component that we want to use our states in or our store in. So here I'm going to first export const use app selector. So this is our own custom selector. Now this will be of typed selector hook. So this will come again from React Redux, and we are just extending it with our own root state. Okay, and then we are saying, okay, whatever is the use app selector, it will has the value of use selector over here. Same for dispatch. So const export const use app dispatch. So this again will be a function. So what we could do is instead of it, this is one way of writing it. The other way of writing this is something like this. This is going to be a function of app dispatch, and here we will have use dispatch. Okay, so this function is of type app dispatch, and what is that? This is nothing but our use dispatch coming. So this is use dispatch coming from React Redux, and this app dispatch is coming from our own store over here. Okay, so once these two are ready, now we can simply use our store wherever we like. Now the problem with app directory here is that everything is server side. So as Next 13, when this video is recorded, is still a new thing, and also it's mentioned in their documentation that third-party libraries like, let's say, React Redux Toolkit or React Redux, their providers may not have something like this use client provided in their component or their file or in their package. So to make that, you could say, that problem overcome, or because if we don't do that, then this is going to throw an error that you're providing client component or you're importing a server component in the client, and so on and so on. So to avoid those problems, what we will do is we'll create our own provider component, which will have all the providers, and then we will get that provider inside our layout and simply use it to wrap it in our component. I'll show you how this works. So here, what I'm going to do is inside components, I could say new folder providers. Okay, now here we can have multiple providers. So we will have our, let's say, this React Redux Toolkit provider. We might have, let's say, our own context providers, whatever. But what we need to do is we have just one main file which brings in all these providers and just send it to the layout wherever we want to use it, or to the page level component wherever we want to use it. So here I'm going to just create one, which is provider.tsx. So this is going to be RFC, just a simple React component. Actually, let's put some TypeScript. So TFC, tsrfc, this one. Now here it will have props. So there will be children, which will come from React node. So children. And what I'm going to do is here I will import the provider. So import provider from React Redux. So this provider will come from React Redux. Okay. And what I'm going to do is here we will have provider like this. Now this has a name conflict because this is also provider, this is also provider. So what I will do is I'll change this name to, let's say, custom provider or client provider, because this is all going to be client providers. So let's call this as well client provider. And here it needs store. So we will import our store. So import store from, now this we need to go to utils and then client and store. So once we have this store, so we just need to pass it over here. So store equal to store. Okay. Now here it throws an error that has no default export. So what we need to do is go over here and simply export this. So export default store. Great. So this is our provider, and here we can pass the children. So whatever components that we want this provider to have access in. And then let's say if you have multiple provider, let's say you have something, let's say a theme provider, for instance, or some other thing. So here you have theme provider like this, team provider, and then the component children here. So put the children here. And once we have this client provider, now it depends upon where we want this Redux store to be used. Do we want it to be used in entire app? Then in that case, it's best to put it in this layout.tsx. Do we want it to be used just in specific section, let's say dashboard? Then it's best to use in that layout or that page component. I want in this case in the entire app. So what I'm going to do is this body here, I'm gonna, that children over here, I will just wrap it with the provider that we just created. So custom provider, sorry, client provider, and here I will pass this like this. Perfect. So now whatever components, if they are server side rendered, great. So we didn't like go against any rule of not having a server component inside a client. So that's great. We have a server component inside a server component. We have a client component wrapping a server component. That's fine. We can use this format. That's great. And any pages, any components now, because this is our root layout, will have access to our store. So let's go inside our blog form, where not in the blog form, where we have our header. I guess it's in page dot, yeah, in the page. So what I'm going to do is I'll keep this header as it is, and I'll create an avatar component. And from there, from here, or okay, let's try to create from the blog form. Let's try to pass this user details to the Redux, our store, and let's try to grab it from the avatar component. Sounds a bit crazy, but just to give you an example how it works, like one component sets the state and the other component has access to the state. So what I'm going to do is here inside components, avatar.tsx, let's create a scaffolding from our store here. Oh, sorry, from the hooks of our store, we need to get use app selector, because generally, as it's said in the documentation of Redux Toolkit, what you will do is you will use selector from React Redux, but we already created, and there you need to pass the states and everything. But as we have already created our own selector, which is already typed, or extending this use selector type, so in that case we can simply use our use app selector. So this one over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say import use app selector from utils client store hooks. Then once we have this use app selector, next thing we need to do is we need to just use it over here. So here I'm going to say const user equal to use app selector. Now to this selector we pass a function which returns the state as Copilot is suggesting us. And that's where I said previously that one extra step to add here to save our adding this function every time wherever we want our user use app selector and get the users from the user store. What we could do here is we could do something like this. Here I could say export const select user. So the function I will just create it over here like this. So select user, then state, which could be of type this one over here. So this is going to be, or we could call it as a root state to keep it easy. So root state, and from that root state we already will have access to this user over here. So this select user, we will import it again in our avatar component. So here I'm going to say import select user from the client slice, and then we can simply pass that function here, select user. Great. So this is our user now. Now once we get access, once the user is hydrated, we can have our avatar URL. So what I'm going to do is here I can create a div with class name and give it, let's say, width of maybe 9, height of 9, and position will be relative because we will be using image component from next. Now this also needs to be a client component. So use client, and then we will have here import image from next image, and here we can have layout of fill src user.avatar rounded. This will go over here, and this will be, yeah, this should be fine. Now here it is telling me that this is deprecated, so in new version we need to do something like this, fill, and here it's telling me that user is possibly null, so we can pass this like this here. And or what we could do is we could do something like this, or let's just do user rather than doing user src, and then here we could have alt also. So here we could say user dot name. Perfect. So that's our avatar component. Let's export this, export default avatar component. That's great. Now let's save this as well. So then we go to our block form. Here we just set the user details. So let's get in the user details from the page. So from the page, let's get these details from here. Let's get it in the block form. Let's just have first our import use app dispatch from utils client store hooks. Here I'm going to say const dispatch will be use app dispatch, and then when we when this is mounted, so use effect, so we can get use effect from React, use effect. And here, I know this is a bit crazy, but just trying to simulate a scenario where one component sets the state and the other component has access to it. So once there is dispatch, so here we could say dispatch, and sorry, dispatch dispatch, and here we pass our action. So we also need to get the action. So here I'm going to say import set user from utils client store user slice, like exactly how it does here in the documentation. So we get the actions and we use dispatch to dispatch those actions like this. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say dispatch set user, and to this I'm going to pass the user details like this. Let's remove this, and there we go. So this will set our user. Great. Now once this is done, we can get in the avatar component in our header over here. So avatar, and give it some, let's say something like this, flex, justify between, item center, some styling. And if we see in our website, so let's refresh this page, react.createContext is not a function. Maybe I'm messing up somewhere. Yes, over here, this is a client component, so client provider. So here we need to add use client like this. Great. Now if we go back, and there we go. So now another problem, src prop. So this. Now we just need to add this inside our config. So in our next, let's copy this image URL. Let's go to our config. Then here we have images, then there it has the domains, and inside this domains we will add our domain here, this one. Now this needs to be restarted, I guess. Found a change, restart the server, of course. And there it is, we have our image over there. Now this needs to be rounded full. So what I'm going to do is inside our avatar, so this here, I say rounded full, and I'm going to say overflow hidden, and that makes it rounded. Now we can get this to the site. So if I go just some style fixing, so here in the on the header, if I do something like this, px of let's say 5, and just add a div, that should take it over here, and there we have it, the avatar URL with Redux. Not exactly with Redux, but we got the user details set with the React Redux Toolkit, created a store, and just simply set the state in one component and have it accessed in the other. That's great. So that's all in this video. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you like this video, please hit the thumbs up button. If you feel this video is worth sharing with your network, please do share with your network. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do subscribe to my channel. So see you in the next video. Till the next time, goodbye.